Chapter 260, The Mark 7. It looked like writing, yet it wasn't. It was a mark with a single line vertically penetrating the center of the character, too. As it didn't exist as a written character, it was closer to a kind of symbol. Mok Jung-un had spent a long time searching for this scar-like mark that had been left on his deceased grandfather's body. And the first time he found someone with an identical mark was the scar on the side of Mok In-dan, the leader of the Yun Mok Sword Manor. Leader Mok In-dan had said that the one who left this scar was Ghost Blade, one of the 8 stars. Since Ghost Blade had left this mark on the leader, Mok Jung-un was convinced that he was either the same person who killed his grandfather or was related to him, so he had been searching for clues about him. And now, another trace had finally been discovered. It was different from before. That was because it wasn't a scar but deliberately engraved. This was semantically different. The marks left on his grandfather and Yun Mok Sword Manor's leader Mok In-dan were scars forcibly carved by someone else. However, the mark engraved on the tip of the scabbard wasn't a trace of being subjected to something. It was nothing more than a mark meant to be seen. Ugh. Mok Jung-un pulled back even harder on the hair of the embroidered uniform guard 100-men commander Jaim Chong, whose face was completely torn and suffering, and said, "You have no idea how long I've been searching." "What, triple, you bug?" Jaim Chong's pronunciation was slurred as all his teeth were broken. In fact, not just his teeth or face, but with his right wrist cut off and his left arm severed up to the shoulder, it wouldn't be strange if his life ended at any moment. Tap tap tap. As if aware of this condition, Mok Jung-un pressed the acupuncture point on his left shoulder to stop the bleeding. Then the gushing blood quickly ceased. Of course, even so, he had already lost so much blood that his complexion was beyond pale and extremely serious. Uff. I got a bit rough without realizing it. But it's okay. You're still alive, aren't you? Tremble, tremble. As he nonchalantly said those chilling words with a smile, Jaim Chong convulsed. Although his vision was dyed red and he could barely see due to the wooden splinters and fragments embedded in his eyes, he could definitely feel the malice in Mok Jung-un's voice. Amidst the pain, Jaim Chong's mind became confused. Who the hell was he? He had clearly reacted after seeing the mark engraved on his scabbard. At this point, it was safe to say that almost no one could recognize this mark. As he stopped. At that moment, someone shouted at Mok Jung-un. It was none other than the embroidered uniform guard Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo. With a tense expression, he had called out to Mok Jung-un with a certain determination. However, Mok Jung-un didn't even turn his head, as if he had no interest. TSK. Did he not even care about him? So Sang Ik-seo placed a palm on his abdomen and said, "If you try to kill that person, I will also eliminate the command goo in my belly." Shwip. Only then did Mok Jung-un's gaze turn towards him. Seeing this, Sang Ik-seo hoped that his gamble would work. Although he had attacked Jaim Chong as if it didn't matter, there was no way it was actually fine. The reason that guy had come here was definitely related to the command goo inside his body. If not, there would be no reason for him to come. You'll eliminate the command goo? That's right. I don't know what your true identity is or what you really want, but you can't deny that one of your purposes for coming here is related to 1,000-men commander Ma Ari Hyen, right? So, I won't say it again. Release that person right now. And leave. If I don't leave, you'll eliminate the command goo? That's right. At his words, Mok Jung-un chuckled. Do as you wish. Sang Ik-seo furrowed his brows at those words. What kind of reaction was this? Do as he wished? You don't care what happens to 1,000-men commander Ma Ari Hyen? No. So do as you wish. Instead, since you threatened me, I'll make sure you pay the price for it. Shiver. Those words sent shivers down Sang Ik-seo's entire body. No, he made eye contact with Mok Jung-un, who was staring at him with an expressionless face, and in that moment he even saw a hallucination of his entire body being sliced and torn apart. Damn it. In an instant, Sang Ik-seo's forehead was drenched in cold sweat. He had tried to create an opportunity for negotiation, but nothing worked. He was at a loss for what to do, but shwip. At that moment, Mok Jung-un's figure disappeared before his eyes. Huh. No way. But then, tap 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 tap. Thud. Feeling the blood splatter from behind, Sang Ik-seo immediately lost consciousness. Mok Jung-un, who had knocked him out by striking his blood acupoints, snorted and looked at his abdomen as he lay there. Well, a promise is a promise. Through Mok Jaeongun's right eye, which had activated the power of the third eye, it was visible. The female Gu poison command Gu, curled up in a corner of Sang Ikesio's abdomen, lying still as if dead. Shwip. Mok Jaeongun slightly cut his index finger with his energy. Then a drop of blood started to form on his finger. Seeing this, Mok Jaeongun brought his finger with the blood droplet towards the location of the female Gu poison command Gu. And stab. He inserted his finger, penetrating Sang Ikesio's abdomen. Although unconscious, as if his body instinctively sensed that something had entered it, his body twitched. Regardless, Mok Jaeongun slightly moved the tip of his inserted finger. Something was felt sticking to the wound on his finger. In sync with this, Mok Jaeongun pulled out the finger he had penetrated. Then a grotesque insect was seen wriggling and sticking to the wound on his finger. Simple. Seeing this, Mok Jaeongun chuckled. Those who didn't know much about Gu poisons would agonize over how to remove it, using drugs or devising ways to eliminate it from inside the body. However, surprisingly, if one utilized the nature of Gu poisons, it was possible to easily extract it. That was because Gu poisons were drawn to stronger poisons. Since it was born from the combination of numerous poison bugs, poison plants, and things related to poison, Gu poisons were keenly responsive to new poisons. Slurp slurp. Mok Jaeongun's blood was nothing short of a deadly poison. Thus, the Gu poison was naturally drawn to it and was desperate to consume it. What the hell is that? Seeing this with his faintly remaining vision, Jaeom-chong's expression stiffened. If carelessly extracted, the command Gu would burst and die on its own. Yet it was sticking to that person's finger, refusing to let go. What the hell was going on? As he was puzzled, at that moment Mok Jaeongun opened his mouth and tossed the Gu poison hanging from his finger into his mouth. Huh. And with that, Mok Jaeongun chewed on the female Gu poison command Gu as it was. Crunch. Squeal squeal squeal. Although he had closed his mouth and was chewing, the sound of the command Gu screaming inside could be heard. Seeing this, Jaeom-chong was flabbergasted. Although born as a pair, the command Gu itself was as deadly as the parasitic type. Yet he was directly chewing and eating this lump of deadly poison? Putting aside disgust, it was a truly insane act. Is he trying to kill himself? But eventually, after chewing for a while, Mok Jaeongun gulped it down. Having eaten the female Gu poison command Gu as it was, Mok Jaeongun pressed the acupuncture point on the Associate Military Commissioner's punctured abdomen to stop the bleeding and walked back to Jaeom-chong. Seeing this, Jaeom-chong couldn't understand. Why is he unharmed? The poison of the Gu poison was so toxic that the esophagus should have melted. Yet Mok Jaeongun was perfectly fine. As he was puzzled with a dumbfounded face, Mok Jaeongun smiled nonchalantly and said, "You must be wondering why I'm unharmed, right? Just how? It's because the poison in my body is stronger than the Gu poison's poison, so I'm fine, right? Poison in his body? Could it be a poison master?" Jaeom-chong couldn't help but be inwardly shocked at those words. As far as he knew, in all of the Central Plains and beyond, there were only 2 people who had reached the level of a poison master. It was only Gyeong Sao, the head of the Gyeong family, who guarded the entrance to the Western Depot and wielded the 8 poison snake staff, and Dang In-hee, the head of the Sichuan Dang family, one of the 7 great families, who possessed the 1,000 poison hands. But was this person saying he was a poison master? Is he one of those 2? It was highly likely. However, he definitely wasn't Gyeong Sao of the 8 poison snake staff. No, in the first place he couldn't even be here and wouldn't interfere with their affairs. Then that meant the 1,000 poison hands? If it wasn't him who had reached the level of a poison master, he wouldn't be able to withstand the Gu poison. Convinced that Mok Jaeongun was Dang In-hee, the head of the Sichuan Dang family and the 1,000 poison hands, Jaeom-chong spoke in an uncomprehending tone. Withstand the poison, there's one thing, but why did you eat it? If the Spywit Dum dies, the Athu Pai of parasitic poison also. It seems you surprisingly don't know much about Gu poisons. Huh. Gu poisons aren't simply made by gathering poison bugs and selecting the most toxic ones. In the first place, the fact that a pair is made to influence each other also contains a kind of sorcerous power. Sao Sui. If a being that has overcome all poisons and become a commander is defeated by another poison and consumed, what would happen to the hierarchy? At those words, Jaeom-chong's eyes, reddened with wounds, trembled. It was because he understood what Mok Jae-un had said. Is that really possible? It was a part he had theoretically understood but doubted if it was actually possible. If the command goo was eaten by a poison bug with a stronger poison, it was possible for that poison bug to become the new command goo. However, it was unknown whether it would be possible if it was a poison master, not a poison bug. As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-un approached, grabbed his hair and said, "Grab. Well, if Thousand Men Commander Ma Arahayan is alive, I would have become the command goo, and if not, it was just bad luck." At those words, Jae Chong inwardly clicked his tongue. Didn't that mean he had gambled on something he himself couldn't be certain of? As he was dumbfounded by this. Bam. Ugh. Mok Jae-un slammed his face onto the floor and said, "Rather than that, wouldn't it be better for you to focus on your own situation? From now on, I'm going to count how many times the words, 'Please kill me,' come out of your mouth." Chapter 261, Clue 1. Stab. Uff. Jae Chong let out a pained groan as the needle pierced through the center of his toenail. He wanted to scream in agony, but he couldn't even do that because of the ball of cloth stuffed in his mouth. He had tried to steel himself, but he couldn't endure the relentless pain. He prided himself on having a strong willpower that could cross the threshold, but it took less than a quarter of an hour for it to crumble. What was that? Yank. Mok Jae-un pulled the ball of cloth out of his mouth. Jae Chong barely managed to speak, exhaling rough breaths. Please kill me. That's the 5th time now. It's still too early. Stuff. Peach. Mok Jae-un shoved the ball of cloth back into his mouth. Then he slowly pushed another needle next to his toenail. Stab. Uff. Jae Chong writhed in pain, appealing for mercy. However, Mok Jae-un, without even a change in his expression, shook and tilted his toenail with the inserted needle. Unable to bear the suffering, Jae Chong eventually lost consciousness. Slump. Just as his head was about to droop down. Slap. Mok Jae-un slapped his forehead with his palm, forcing it back up. With this, Jae Chong, who had been about to faint, regained his senses. Upon waking up, Jae Chong's heart nearly stopped at the sight of Mok Jae-un's face through his hazy vision. For a fleeting moment he wished he wouldn't wake up again, but that was a futile hope. This guy is truly a demon. He had never seen someone so vicious before. He himself had interrogated others many times, but he had never gone this far. This guy was torturing him to the brink of death, not giving him any chance to rest or reprieve. It was as if he was venting his anger. So he had no choice but to desperately wish for death. After all, with both arms severed and his body so ruined, he realized that death was the only rest. He mumbled in a feeble voice. Then without a word, Mok Jae-un ripped off one of the toenails he had stabbed with needles. Rip. Uff. The human body was truly amazing. Even though the pain continued, one would think he would get used to it, but that wasn't the case at all. Each new pain only compounded the existing pain, multiplying the suffering. Mok Jae-un sweetly whispered into his ear. "You want to die, don't you? Don't you want to close your eyes peacefully like this?" It was indescribably strange. Never had the words about letting him die sounded so sweet. If only he could escape this pain right now, he felt like he could do anything. Clench. At that moment, Jae Chong bit down on the ball of cloth filling his mouth. For a moment he had weakened and almost succumbed to the guy's temptation. No matter how painful it was, he couldn't do anything for the one torturing him and driving him to death. Then through his hazy vision he saw Mok Jae-un's face. The corners of his mouth were stretched to his ears. Shudder. The moment he saw this, a chill ran down Jae Chong's spine. Even as he was struggling to muster his resolve, Mok Jae-un wasn't showing disappointment but rather joy. Why the hell was he so happy? Why was he smiling with such a demonic face? As he was filled with questions. Schwip. Mok Jae-un placed his hand on his shoulder and gently whispered. "I'm glad. I was worried you might weaken and give up. What? Please endure a little longer. I want to see you suffer and be in agony. The night is still very long after all." The moment he heard those words, Jae Chong felt like his heart would shatter from pain. It seemed that what this guy wanted wasn't simply to extract the desired information from him. He was enjoying his pain and suffering itself. This guy is a demon who crawled up from the depths of hell, the embodiment of evil. He couldn't think of it any other way. As fear engulfed his entire body and mind, the resolve he had built up crumbled in an instant. Even if he endured, who would acknowledge it? In the end, wouldn't everything end with his death? At that moment he choked up. Why did he alone have to suffer like this? Even if he maintained his loyalty and righteousness here and died in agony until the very end, would they even know? In the end, even if he died, wouldn't they be the only ones enjoying the glory and benefits? As his thoughts reached this point, Jiam Chong's body went limp as if he had given up. It would be troublesome if you gave up already. Seeing Jiam Chong's limp and unresponsive state, Mok Jae-un clicked his tongue as if disappointed. He had hoped for him to endure a little longer, but it seemed meaningless now. So he removed the ball of cloth stuffed in his mouth. Yank. Ha ha ha. As the ball of cloth was removed, Jiam Chong feebly opened his mouth, catching his breath. What, you are, just, tell me. I won't do anymore. Grab. Ugh. At that moment Mok Jae-un gripped his jaw. Then with one hand he fixed his head in place and pushed his jaw inward and upward. With that crack, along with the sound of bones creaking, Jiam Chong's dislocated jaw joint was realigned. Not only were all his teeth broken when his face was torn, but his jaw joint was also dislocated. That's why he couldn't pronounce properly. But now that his jaw joint was realigned. Let's talk now. Just how much? Although his pronunciation was still slurred due to his missing teeth, it was at a level that could be understood better than before. However, he wasn't happy at all. In the end, whether this way or that, he had to tell the guy what he wanted to hear in order to meet his death comfortably. But before that, there was one question he wanted to resolve. Before answering, I want to ask one thing. It seems you're not ready yet. At that question, Mok Jae-un tried to shove the ball of cloth back into his mouth. Jiam Chong was startled and hurriedly spoke. I was just curious about how the Sichuan Dang family managed to uncover our existence. Sichuan Dang family? At his words, Mok Jae-un furrowed his brows. What was this about now? Why was this guy suddenly associating him with the Sichuan Dang family? As he was puzzled, Jiam Chong cautiously said, in the current martial world, the only ones who have reached the level of Poison Master are Gaiong Sao, the 8 poison snake staff, and Dang In-hee, the head of the Sichuan Dang family, the 1,000 poison hands. So, among them Gaiong Sao. It couldn't possibly be here, so naturally the only one left is the 1,000 poison hands. Why do you assert that Gaiong Sao wouldn't be here? That's... Seeing him hesitate, Mok Jae-un's eyes narrowed. Thanks to his attitude, he could easily figure out one thing. You seem to know Gaiong Sao very well. Or perhaps he's on your side. Damn it. I did something stupid. At Mok Jae-un's words, Jiam Chong blamed his own foolishness. He didn't need to mention Gaiong Sao of the 8 poison snake staff, but in trying to confirm that his guess was correct, he ended up revealing unnecessary information. Don't worry. I'm not particularly interested in this. Rather, there's something else I'd like you to tell me. Something else. The mark on your scabbard, what is it? At this question, Jiam Chong furrowed his brows. He thought the guy was asking because he knew something about the mark, but did he not know anything? But then Mok Jae-un pressed down hard on his shoulder and said, Squeeze. Ugh. I'd like you to answer immediately when asked. Don't try to be clever. It's a mark symbolizing the organization. Organization. Yes. As I thought, it is a group. This aligned almost perfectly with his expectations. So Mok Jae-un asked another question. I understand it symbolizes an organization, but what does this mark actually mean? This won't do. It seems you're not ready yet. As he said that, Mok Jae-un tried to shove the ball of cloth back into his mouth. Jiam Chong was startled and hurriedly spoke. I don't know the exact meaning either. I only know that it adds 1 to 2. Adds 1 to 2? What did that mean? Mok Jae-un ruminated on those words. Since he said it adds 1 to 2, the part that was originally, with the lower part of the stroke being longer, indeed meant 2. But what did it mean to add 1 vertically penetrating the line? Why not just add 1 horizontally? That way it would become the character 3. And the meaning would make sense. But why did they say it had that meaning when the line penetrated vertically? Was there a hidden meaning? There's also the character 3. So do you really think that makes sense? I really don't know. I was just told that something that couldn't exist was added. Something that couldn't exist was added? Mok Jae-un stroked his chin. It was too vague, so it was difficult to understand the meaning just from this. But it didn't matter. If he found out what they were doing, the answer would naturally come out. So Mok Jae-un tried to ask what he was most curious about. This was the most urgent matter above all else. Is the one called Ghost Blade also on your side? At those words, Jae-chong's expression slightly distorted. It seems so. Who the hell is this guy? The reason Jae-chong reacted this way was that until now, no one had ever figured out that Ghost Blade was related to them. To the flustered Jae-chong, Mok Jae-un said what he wanted to ask the most. When Ghost Blade kills someone or something, does he leave your organization's mark? When he kills someone or something? Yes. If this was confirmed, the culprit would undoubtedly be Ghost Blade. Mok Jae-un stared intently at Jae-chong. However, to Mok Jae-un's question, Jae-chong gave a completely unexpected answer. Do you think that makes sense? What? Why would he leave a mark if he deliberately killed someone? What do you mean by that? The dead can't speak. And a dead corpse is meant to rot and disappear. But our organization doesn't leave traces. So why would we leave a mark on someone we killed? At those words, one of Mok Jae-un's eyebrows raised. That was because what this guy said wasn't wrong, even if he was lying. There was no reason for a secretive organization to leave traces as if boasting. So Mok Jae-un asked, then why did they leave such a mark on those they killed or someone? I think there's some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? We don't leave our organization's mark on those we have already killed. And the one who leaves such a mark as a scar is? The one who leaves it is? Only the one you know as Ghost Blade. As soon as he finished speaking, Mok Jae-un grabbed Jae-chong by the collar, pulled him close and said in a menacing voice, are you messing with me right now? You're saying Ghost Blade left a mark on someone who was already dead and you want me to believe that? It's not a lie. Ghost Blade leaving that mark is a kind of warning. Warning? What does that mean? I don't know exactly either. I just heard that Ghost Blade leaves such scars as a warning to those involved in our affairs. If they ignore the warning, he makes them pay with their lives and erases the scar. Bam. Ugh. Before he could even finish speaking, Mok Jae-un pushed him to the floor. Startled, Jae-chong said, it's true. I've already confirmed that he left the scar and then killed someone, yet you keep trying to deceive me. Left the scar and then killed? How could that be? How could that be? I saw it with my own eyes. That's impossible. Didn't I tell you? Why would Ghost Blade leave a trace that could be tracked or used as a clue in such a place? This is Aya. A scream of pain burst out from Jae-chong's mouth. Mok Jae-un's fingers had dug into his collarbone. As he was suffering like this, Mok Jae-un's eyes narrowed to the point of sharpness. He doesn't leave traces on the dead? Mok Jae-un's mind became complicated. Based on the clues he had pursued so far, Ghost Blade should be the one who killed him. But Ghost Blade said he doesn't leave traces on the dead. Yet there was a scar-like mark left on his dead grandfather's body. It wasn't left a long time ago. The blood on the scar was clear evidence that the wound was inflicted at the moment of death. But this guy was strongly denying it. That meant one of two things. Either this guy was lying to deceive him or... Could it be? The focus of Mok Jae-un's pupils shrank. Eventually, Mok Jae-un grabbed Jae-chong's collarbone with his fingers and pulled him close. Directly grabbing the bone and pulling, it couldn't be anything but painful. Arg. Regardless, Mok Jae-un asked. If Ghost Blade is from your organization, you should at least know well whether he killed someone or not, right? At this question, the suffering Jae-chong shook his head vigorously. I don't know. Shall I make you know? It's true. We are a cell organization to begin with, so we can only move according to the orders given and can't know exactly what each of us is doing. You can't know? Are you certain? Yes. If it's not information we absolutely need to know, it's not even shared. It was too desperate to be a lie. So Mok Jae-un stared at him and said, then you must have never heard the name Mun-no. Mun-no? Did you just say Mun-no? Didn't you just say that information isn't shared? At those words, Jae-chong trembled. Seeing this, Mok Jae-un found it strange and asked, you know something? At that question, Jae-chong hesitated for a moment with a frown before opening his mouth. If the Mun-no you're talking about is the same name we know, it's the old name of medicine immortal Hae Young. Immortal. Chapter 262, Clue 2. Medicine Immortal He Young. Along with crying Dr. Ho Ta, he was known as the greatest physician of the era, and his knowledge of medicine was unrivaled. Medicine Immortal He Young had saved countless lives with his exceptional medical skills and knowledge of medicine. There was an event that made him renowned throughout the entire Central Plains. It was during the rebellion of the Red Turban Bandits over 30 years ago, which resulted in numerous casualties. As a result, corpses piled up like mountains everywhere and began to rot, causing a terrible plague of unknown origin to spread. This plague quickly spread, engulfing the entire Siam Xizang region within just half a month, and chaos overflowed in all directions. Fortunately, however, the plague ended without leaving Siam Xizang. It was because Medicine Immortal He Young had created a cure for the plague. With this opportunity, Medicine Immortal He Young, who had been virtually unknown, was able to rise to become the greatest physician of the era alongside crying Dr. Ho Ta. However, despite this fame, not much was known about him. There were few who even knew where he lived or what his real name was. If the Munno you're talking about is the same name we know, it's the old name of Medicine Immortal He Young. At Jiam Chong's words, Mok Jiangun furrowed his brows. That was because Munno was none other than the name of his grandfather who had raised him. He had asked thinking that this organization might know about him since his grandfather had been killed by Ghost Blade. But he received a completely unexpected answer. What does that mean? It means exactly that. The only Munno we know is the name Medicine Immortal He Young used in the past. The name Medicine Immortal He Young used in the past? Are you certain? If it's not a case of people having the same name, the only Munno we know is him. At his words, Mok Jiangun's eyes narrowed. What the hell did this mean? He had come out into the world to find the enemy who killed his grandfather and had learned many things. Among them, naturally, was the fame of Medicine Immortal He Young. Upon learning of his existence, Mok Jiangun had simply thought that he was a famous physician who knew more about medicinal herbs than his grandfather. In fact, he hadn't paid much attention, thinking it had nothing to do with his revenge. But this was completely unexpected information. My grandfather is Medicine Immortal He Young? Mok Jiangun's mind became complicated. Although there was a commonality in his knowledge of medicinal herbs and his ability to handle them well, could he really say that Medicine Immortal He Young was the same person as his grandfather just based on that? So Mok Jiangun pressed his knee against Jiam Chong's chest and said, Munno had been living in seclusion deep in the mountains for over 17 years. How could such a person be Medicine Immortal He Young? Did you just say 17 years? Yes. It was the time he had lived with his grandfather. However, if it's 17 years, it's even more certain that it's Medicine Immortal He Young. What? Medicine Immortal He Young had disappeared and his whereabouts had been unknown since nearly 18 years ago. If the Munno you know had been living in seclusion for that long, it's definitely Medicine Immortal He Young. Seeing him becoming even more convinced, Mok Jiangun's mind became more twisted. Is my grandfather really Medicine Immortal He Young? His exceptional knowledge of medicine, to the extent that there was no medicinal herb he didn't know, was thought to be simply because his grandfather was an herbalist who had lived in the mountains for a long time. But now that he thought about it, among those outside, there were few who knew medicinal herbs as well as his grandfather. Sigh. He had only thought about finding his enemy, not about learning more about his grandfather himself. It was also because he had never seen anyone who knew the name Munno. Seeing Mok Jiangun at a loss for words after learning the unknown truth, Jiam Chong inwardly clicked his tongue. Munno. They had long searched for Medicine Immortal He Young's whereabouts. But to unexpectedly meet someone who knew Medicine Immortal He Young's whereabouts in this situation was truly ironic. What a pity. If it weren't for this situation, it would have been a great achievement. But now all of this was meaningless. Medicine Immortal He Young. The conversation he had with the Poison King Bek Saha flashed through Mok Jiangun's mind. Then you really don't know who that Ghost Blade is. That's right. What I learned from fighting him is that he had been severely injured by someone called Medicine Immortal He Young, known as the greatest herbalist of the era. Is that all you know? At first I didn't believe it. Until now, no one knew that Medicine Immortal He Young had learned martial arts. He was an herbalist after all. Well, he could have hidden it. Yes, that could be the case. But one thing is certain. If Medicine Immortal He Yang is truly the one who severely injured Ghost Blade, his poison arts far surpass mine. Recalling this, Mok Jae-un organized his thoughts step by step. It seemed he really didn't know much about his grandfather until now. And yet he had stubbornly clung to a single mark, thinking only of revenge, which felt quite foolish. Fame, martial arts. Why had his grandfather hidden all of these things? The grandfather he knew was a person who was detached from such things. But was there a reason he had to hide it even from him? No, it was highly likely that he had hidden all these facts because he knew this would happen. It's strange. But if his grandfather was indeed Medicine Immortal He Yang, there was something that didn't add up. Master Baek Saha clearly said that Ghost Blade was defeated by Medicine Immortal He Yang. That meant his grandfather's martial arts skills were stronger than even one of the 8 stars, known as the best in the current martial arts world. Could such a grandfather be easily killed by Ghost Blade? Of course, this wasn't completely impossible. Because Ghost Blade could have advanced his martial arts by relentlessly training for 17 years, surpassing his grandfather. This is also a possibility. Although he had lived with him for 17 years, he had never seen his grandfather cultivating martial arts. Of course, for a master who had reached a high-level, meditation or mental cultivation could be more effective, but he hadn't seen him doing that much either. If one side was training and the other remained the same or regressed, it was possible. However, there was one more thing to confirm here. The fact that he left a scar on my grandfather means it's certain that Ghost Blade and my grandfather fought. But this guy clearly said that Ghost Blade doesn't leave a mark on those he kills. Several speculations became possible from here. One was that this guy was lying and Ghost Blade killed his grandfather and left the scar. However, there was no point in leaving a mark on a dead person because it would become a trace. So that likely wasn't the case. Another speculation was that his grandfather was old, so he lost his life after exhausting his energy fighting Ghost Blade. But could a master of Ghost Blade's level make such a mistake? This was also somewhat unlikely. A third party appeared and killed my grandfather who had been weakened from fighting Ghost Blade. Clench. Mok Jae-un's fist tightened. It was the most likely possibility. That way it made sense that the trace left by Ghost Blade remained on his grandfather even in death. Once his mind was organized up to this point, Mok Jae-un stared at Jae-chong and asked, "What is the relationship between your organization and Mun no Medicine Immortal He Yang? What does that? Stop playing dumb. You know Medicine Immortal He Yang's real name, which is not known to the public, and Medicine Immortal He Yang died at the hands of Ghost Blade." What? I said Medicine Immortal He Yang died at the hands of Ghost Blade. That's impossible. What's impossible? Your organization's mark left by Ghost Blade was there. At these words, Jae-chong frowned and said, "Didn't I tell you? Why would Ghost Blade leave such a mark? Besides, Medicine Immortal He Yang is someone the organization must capture alive." Suddenly, Jae-chong closed his mouth. He had intended to give the information the guy wanted, but to minimize the information related to the organization as much as possible. But he had misspoken. Capture alive. So there was a third party after all. What? Jae-chong questioned Mok Jae-un's incomprehensible words. What did he mean by there being a third party? To the puzzled Jae-chong, Mok Jae-un said, "Never mind that. Why are you trying to capture Medicine Immortal He Yang alive?" At that question, Jae-chong answered immediately without even thinking. "I don't know. There's nothing good about not answering. I really don't know. I was just told that we must secure his whereabouts." "Do you know what?" "What?" Crack. Arg. With the sound of a collarbone breaking, Jae-chong screamed. No matter which part it was bound to hurt when a bone broke, but he didn't know the collarbone could hurt this much. To the suffering Jae-chong, Mok Jae-un whispered in his ear, "I can now tell whether you're hiding something or not. I wouldn't want to make you say, 'Please kill me' 10 times. Uff. No answer. Should I break your left collarbone this time? No, that wouldn't be enough. It would be nice to shatter it into pieces. Let's start with the right side. Essie, stop. That's not the answer I want. Crack. Barg. I heard that Medicine Immortal He Yang is hiding something important." In the end, words spilled out of Jae-chong's mouth. "Something? What is it?" Arg. I really don't know that. I only know that he deceived that person and ran away with it, nothing more." Ran away with it? Was it something important to this organization? But was there anything important that his grandfather could have hidden? He remembered everything that was in the house, but there was nothing particularly important. Do you really not know? It's true. Please believe me. Jiam Chong sincerely pleaded. What's not believable? I feel like I could squeeze it out of you. Mok Jae-un's fingers, which were digging into his flesh, were about to move sideways. Startled by this, Jiam Chong hurriedly said, I'm just a mid-level executive in the 2nd Division. But Ghost Blade, a high-level executive in the 1st Division, might know. 1st Division? For a moment, Jiam Chong's expression stiffened and distorted. Having revealed even the organizational hierarchy, Jiam Chong now truly gave up. Since he had disclosed this much, there was no point in trying to withhold information anymore. To him, Mok Jae-un asked, Is the 1st Division the highest rank in your organization? Yes. The organizational structure goes 1st Division, 2nd Division, 3rd Division, like that, right? Yes. How many divisions are there? There are a total of 5 divisions. Oh ho. If he was a mid-level executive in the 2nd Division out of 5, it was a high position. After all, it was unlikely for someone with this level of martial arts to hold a low position. But if even he had such limited information, this organization was definitely operating as a cell structure. If you're a mid-level executive in the 2nd Division, that's quite high. Is information restricted to that extent? Being a mid-level executive is nothing special. I see. Then do the high-level executives in the 1st Division know many things? They definitely know more than me. In the end, you're telling me to ask a high-level executive. All right. Then where can I meet that high-level executive named Ghost Blade? I'd appreciate it if you could tell me his identity. I really don't know that. Do you think someone like me in the 2nd Division would know the revealed identity or whereabouts of a high-level executive in the 1st Division? I don't understand. Then who do you report to regarding your missions? At that question, Jiam Chong was momentarily at a loss for words. It seemed he had asked the right question. No matter how much of a cell structure it was, there had to be someone to report to and a connection to operate. Saying there wasn't any didn't make sense. Tell me, who do you report to? Is it the one you mentioned earlier as, that person? That's absurd. How could someone like me directly report to that person? That person is a noble being that even we in the 2nd Division cannot meet. A noble being? Tilting his head, Mok Jae-un asked. What is the identity of that noble being? Well, if you don't even know Ghost Blade, who is directly above you, you probably won't know this. Then how do you refer to that being you call, that person? You don't just call him that person, right? That's... Jiam Chong hesitated for a moment. He had pretty much told this guy everything already. Even if he told him how they referred to that person, it wasn't like this guy could find that person. To the hesitating Jiam Chong, Mok Jae-un said, If you're thinking of testing my patience, I was going to tell you. We call that person this. I don't know exactly why we call him that, but the 3rd... Ugh. It was at that very moment. Before he could even finish speaking, the blood vessels in his neck and face swelled up. Realizing something was wrong, Mok Jae-un grabbed his head and face to calm the swollen blood vessels. However, what? He tried to control the energy, but something was strange. It was different from the usual case of energy flowing backward or blood vessels going out of control due to a sudden swelling. Those... Splat. In an instant, Jiam Chong's head exploded. There was no time to do anything. As a result, Mok Jae-un's hands, face and even clothes were covered in blood. Thud. Plop. Mok Jae-un's eyes sharpened as he pushed away the dead Jiam Chong's body. The fact that he died while trying to say something meant he had been subjected to a taboo. But this wasn't a taboo caused by martial arts. The unpleasant and ominous energy rising from the corpse of the dead Jiam Chong was none other than the curse power containing a cursing technique. The implication of this was simple. A taboo by sorcery. Chapter 263, Clue 3. A taboo by sorcery. Mok Jae-un was convinced as he looked at the corpse of the dead Jiam Chong. An unpleasant and ominous curse power was escaping from the body. Sizzle sizzle. Of course few could see this. Unless they had awakened the ghost eye like Mok Jae-un. This level of curse power is a first. Although weakened and exhausted due to his torture, To be able to imprint a curse in the mind of a master who had crossed the threshold and impose a taboo, the curse power was unimaginable. Diviners were divided into 6 grades: divine, sun, moon, technique, profound, and conveying. Mok Jaeongun had experienced in Seok the primal killing pavilion master, and Jo Taechong of the 3 eyes, both of whom had received the highest title of sun-level diviner. Twice. No, 3 times. They also possessed tremendous curse power. But just from the remnant traces he could estimate that the curse power of the one who had imposed this curse taboo was several times greater. A divine-level diviner? Divine-level diviner. It was a title bestowed upon only 6 among diviners. They were called the 6 divine-level diviners. Those who had received the title of divine-level diviner had reached the pinnacle of sorcery, and there were even stories that their curse power and techniques had reached the realm of half-immortality. Perhaps the one who had placed the curse taboo on the dead Jaemchong was one of the 6 divine-level diviners. A divine-level diviner. If someone who had truly reached the level of a divine-level diviner was closely involved with this organization, it could become even more difficult to carry out his revenge. Mok Jaeongun looked at the corpse with an annoyed gaze. As he approached the truth to avenge his grandfather, unexpected obstacles kept emerging. Anyway, although there were many ambiguous parts, he had obtained a lot of information unlike before. The key point remained unchanged. It was Ghost Blade. Even if a third party had killed him instead, according to Jaemchong, he was a high-level executive in the first division of the organization with the mark. By contacting him, he could get closer to the real truth about his grandfather's death. Shwip. Mok Jaeongun got up and approached someone. It was Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikaseo of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, who had fainted after his acupuncture points were struck. Approaching Sang Ikaseo, Mok Jaeongun, tap tap tap, released the acupuncture points he had struck. Soon after, Sang Ikaseo immediately regained consciousness. Upon regaining consciousness and seeing the Embroidered Uniform Guard 100-men commander Jaemchong dead with his head exploded, Sang Ikaseo was inwardly terrified. Eek. From his perspective, having just woken up, it could only be seen as Mok Jaeongun's doing. Feeling his life threatened, Sang Ikaseo prostrated himself flat in front of Mok Jaeongun. Spare my life, ugh. But the moment he prostrated, his abdomen felt extremely painful. Puzzled, he instinctively looked at the painful area. There was a wound on his abdomen, though he didn't know when it had appeared. What is this? If what he knew was correct, the female goo poison command goo was located in that area of his abdomen. But why was there a wound in that spot? Moreover, the wounded area was extremely painful. He felt a searing pain in his organs as if something was tearing them apart, and it was hard to endure even if he tried to forcibly bear it. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun grabbed his hair and lifted his head. Yank. Huh. Seeing Mok Jaeongun's face, or more precisely the face of Chief Eunuch Ho, the supervisor of the Western Depot, covered in blood as if he had washed it, Sang Ikaseo couldn't make eye contact due to his bewilderment. Regardless, Mok Jaeongun smiled and said, I removed the command goo from your abdomen and gave you another gift, but I'm not sure if you'll like it. Another gift, what do you mean? I gave you a poison that could replace it. Poison? Hearing those words, Sang Ikaseo's expression stiffened. While removing the command goo, the poison penetrated your organs, so by now, it should have spread throughout your entire viscera. Mok Jaeongun grinned and whispered in his ear. How is it? Does it feel like your stomach is burning? Ugh. It was undeniable as the burning pain in his abdomen intensified. I need to expel the poison quickly. Startled, Sang Ikaseo tried to gather his true energy to push the poison out of his body. But he couldn't do it. As Mok Jaeongun said, since he had fainted after his acupuncture points were struck, the poison had already spread throughout his entire viscera. Because of that, it was difficult even to gather his true energy. Rather, when he tried to circulate his energy, arg. The pain intensified several times, bringing tears to his eyes. The poison had spread not only to his viscera but also to his blood vessels. Unable to endure this pain, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikaseo pleaded with Mok Jaeongun as if begging. Please spare my life. Please. Spare your life. That depends on how you respond. What do you mean by how I respond? How did you come to know that person over there? Mok Jaeongun pointed with his chin to the corpse of Jaemchong, who had died with his head exploded. At this question, Sang Ikesio, with a strong will to live, hastily replied. That person approached us first and offered to help us. Help with what? That's. It seems you don't have much desire to live. Then I'll just leave you like this. No, that's not it. He said he would help our faction. What faction is that? The faction led by His Excellency, the Grand Preceptor Hang Yun. Hang Yun? Ah. In the Imperial Palace, there were 4 powerful figures who controlled the country. There was Prince Jiangjin, the younger brother of His Majesty the Emperor, and Prince Zhang, the Emperor's second son, who was the most likely candidate for the throne. Then there was Consort Xiao, the mother of the current crown prince. Lastly, there was the Grand Preceptor Hang Yun, who held the positions of one of the 3 dukes and the admiral of the Central Military Commission. Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikesio of the Embroidered Uniform Guard belonged to this Hang Yun. Interesting. What is? It's full of people from the 4 factions, all entangled and intertwined, desperate to devour each other. Not a single person is loyal to the emperor who actually rules the country. At those words, Sang Ikesio's expression subtly distorted. Was it because he felt a bit of shame? Of course not. If he had felt ashamed by such words, he wouldn't have joined with Hang Yun in the first place. Instead of an old and sickly emperor who indulges in women, if you don't belong to one of the 4 factions, you can't survive in the palace. What do you expect me to do? That was Sang Ikesio's true thoughts. However, in a situation where he could die from the poison in his stomach, he couldn't reveal his true feelings. Sang Ikyo, not caring about being servile, kowtowed on the floor and pleaded with Mok Jiangun. Please spare my life. I'll do anything. He believed that being alive, even in a pile of dog sh*t, was definitely better than being dead. So he didn't care about his pride. Seeing him like this, Mok Jiangun snorted and said, he wouldn't have approached you to help without any compensation, so what condition did he offer? That's. It won't do you any good to delay like that. If the poison spreads further, it'll be useless even if you want to live. He asked us to find and capture the remnants of the Fire Faith Order and give him the right to dispose of them. Mok Jiangun's eyes flickered with surprise at his urgent words. The right to dispose of the Fire Faith Order believers? He had only focused on his grandfather and hadn't shown interest in what they were doing. But suddenly being told that they had asked for the right to dispose of the Fire Faith Order believers raised questions. Why the Fire Faith Order? Did their organization have a grudge against the Fire Faith Order? Otherwise, there would be no reason to mobilize the military power of the Imperial Palace, which encompassed the entire Central Plains, to capture the Fire Faith Order believers. No, in the first place, the Fire Faith Order was not only rejected by the Imperial Palace but also by the Taoist and Buddhist sects, and even the martial artists had contributed to their persecution. So Mok Jiangun changed his thinking. The right to dispose doesn't necessarily mean to eliminate them. Could be because they had some close connection with them or wanted something from them. So Mok Jiangun asked him, if you received the right to dispose, what did you do with them? Did you kill them? We used various methods to get them out of the prison and take them away. Take them away? Yes. The speculation from his changed thinking was correct. Judging by the fact that they didn't kill them but took them away, it was certain that the organization with the mark had some connection or purpose with the Fire Faith Order, as expected. But if they used various methods to take out the Fire Faith Order believers, did that mean there was a natural way to get them out of the underground prison? Good. Then you can get someone out of the prison anytime, right? It's not that easy to take them out as I please. It requires some prior arrangements, and even if it's a regular prison, once they're imprisoned in the underground prison, they can't be taken out. At these words, Mok Jiangun clicked his tongue as if disappointed. If it had been possible, he had intended to use this person to get them out without needing to go in himself, but it seemed difficult. However, since this person was an associate military commissioner, wouldn't he have the necessary authority? He had to successfully complete the secret mission given by the society leader to steal the Holy Fire Spirit Orb in order to contact him and obtain clues about Ghost Blade. But since the Embroidered Uniform Guard manages the underground prison, wouldn't it be possible if we devise a way? The prisoners confined in the underground prison are special management targets of high treason, so unless the Emperor, the 3 dukes, the Minister of Justice and others all give their approval, it is impossible to release or pardon them. What were the chances of the emperor, the three dukes, the officials in charge of executing and managing criminal law, and all of them reaching a consensus? It was no exaggeration to say that once imprisoned in the underground prison, one could never come out until their sentence was completed or until death. As expected of the imperial palace, the procedures were not only complicated but also convoluted. No choice. In the end, to steal the holy fire spirit orb of the Fire Faith Order, it seemed he had no choice but to directly enter the underground prison. It was the same for the organization with the mark. At that moment, Mok Jae-un's eyes narrowed. Ah. Come to think of it, the one who had ordered him to steal the holy fire spirit orb of the Fire Faith Order imprisoned in the Imperial Palace's underground prison was the Heaven and Earth Society leader. But Ghost Blade definitely had some connection with the sect leader. Recalling this, Mok Jae-un suddenly came up with a speculation. Could it be that the Heaven and Earth Society leader is also closely connected to or even a member of this organization? Otherwise, it would be too much of a coincidence. The underground prison had complicated procedures, so even a high-ranking associate military commissioner of the Embroidered Uniform Guard couldn't get someone out in any way. But they were dispatched to risk danger and steal the Holy Fire Spirit Orb from such a place. To fit together almost too perfectly. Mok Jae-un stared intently at Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo, who was prostrating and observing his reaction. There was a way to check how accurate his speculation was. So Mok Jae-un asked him, "Then has that organization given up on getting the Fire Faith Order believer imprisoned in the underground prison out?" At that question, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo furrowed his brows. "How did you know there's a Fire Faith Order believer in the underground prison? Just answer the question." "I'm not sure if they've given up." "Your answer is ambiguous." I'm not trying to deceive you. That person seems to have tried to go in and attempted a few times himself, but since the believer is imprisoned in the Eternal Hell Prison, I think he has given up on getting them out." "Eternal Hell Prison? What's that?" he asked because it was the first time he had heard of it. The Eternal Hell Prison is the prison located on the lowest level of the underground prison. The lowest level? Yes. It's where they confine the prisoners deemed the worst of the worst. Worst of the worst. If they use the term eternal, the security must be extremely tight to make it absolutely impossible to escape. There was actually one person who escaped from there since the underground prison was built. So I heard that the Eternal Hell Prison was created as a reinforced version based on that incident. Since it was built, no one imprisoned there has ever escaped. If the security is tight enough that even a master who has crossed the threshold can't easily get someone out, how stringent is it? It seemed it would be even more difficult than entering the prison. Clicking his tongue inwardly, Mok Jae-un changed his question. "If they've given up, I guess they just left that Fire Faith Order believer alone until they could find a way." "No, that's not the case. Rather than getting them out, Jae Chong seemed to be trying to find out something from the Fire Faith Order believer through interrogation, as if it was urgent for some reason." "Trying to find out something?" "Yes." "What is it?" In fact, Sang Ik-seo shouldn't have been able to answer this question. However, although they had joined hands out of mutual necessity, he also couldn't fully trust Jae Chong, so he had been secretly monitoring him. But since he was such an exceptional master, he couldn't find out much, and he had only learned the name of what he was trying to find out from that Fire Faith Order believer imprisoned in the underground prison. "I'm not sure exactly what it's used for, but it seemed like he was trying to find out where something called the Treasure Orb is." "Treasure Orb? You don't know what that is?" "I don't know exactly. But there is one thing I speculate." "Speculation?" "Yes. I think it might be related to the serious reason why that Fire Faith Order believer was the only one imprisoned in the Eternal Hell Prison, unlike the other believers." "Serious reason? Was it because the Holy Fire Spiritual Master held a high position and was an important item for the Fire Faith Order? Or was there another reason?" "What is it?" Puzzled, Sang Ik-seo said in a meaningful voice. "I heard that Fire Faith Order believer could foresee the future by receiving revelations from something called the Holy Fire or something." Chapter 264, Clue 4. I heard that Fire Faith Order believer could foresee the future by receiving revelations from something called the Holy Fire or something. At those words, Mok Jae-un raised one eyebrow and tilted his head. Foresee the future? In response to Mok Jae-un's question, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikesio replied. Yes. I don't know if it's true or not, but there was quite a lot of talk about it among the higher-ups, enough to make a fuss. Foresee the future. Was such a thing really possible? Beyond being interesting or fascinating, Mok Jae-eun believed it was completely impossible. In the first place, if it was truly possible, there was no way the Fire Faith Order believers couldn't have prevented being persecuted and ending up like this. However, if we assume it's possible, it would be an ability that everyone would covet. Being able to know what would happen in the future was a tremendous ability. It meant having the advantage of being able to prepare for future events. It's becoming confusing. It became ambiguous whether the society leader was targeting the Holy Fire Spirit Orb because he was in league with the organization with the mark, or because of this foresight ability. Because if it was the foresight ability, it would be a rare ability that anyone would covet. However, there was something to point out here. But didn't you just say that this person could foresee the future? Yes. That sounds as if that believer can't foresee it now. At Mok Jae-eun's words, Sang Ikeseo inwardly clicked his tongue. He didn't miss even the smallest detail. Am I wrong? You're right. I don't know if that believer was able to do it before and lost the ability, or if the believer couldn't do it from the beginning and was just lying, but currently that person can't foresee the future. How do you know that? At first we thought the believer might be deceiving us with lies, so we tested them several times. For example, we presented a cup with poison and one without and had the believer distinguish between them, and even with tests that could endanger their life, the believer really couldn't foresee anything. It turned out to be a meaningless act. Yes. However, thanks to that, the higher-ups who had judged that the Fire Faith Order believer had nothing special lost interest. No, it almost disappeared. But keeping that person imprisoned is just in case. I think that's probably the case. If by a slim chance they find that treasure orb that the Fire Faith Order believer is desperately trying to hide, it might become possible to foresee. Ugh. At that moment, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikeseo stopped mid-sentence, clutched his abdomen and groaned. His face was pale and had a purplish tint, indicating his condition was not good. It was a symptom of the poison spreading beyond his viscera to his entire body. It seemed he couldn't endure it any longer. Ugh. Perhaps due to that influence, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikeseo vomited black blood along with his retching. A foul smell rose from the black blood that fell to the floor. Ads by Pub Future. I'm going to please save. Sang Ikeseo, who had vomited blood, looked at Mok Jae-eun with pleading eyes while crawling on the floor. Mok Jae-eun, who was looking down at him with a dry gaze, shook his head and then made a cut on his finger, opening Sang Ikeseo's jaw. Eat it. Drip drip. Mok Jae-eun's blood entered Sang Ikeseo's mouth. Although he was puzzled by suddenly being told to drink blood, Sang Ikeseo, with a strong desire to live, swallowed it down his throat as instructed. Then, the pain that felt like it was burning his viscera and his entire body began to subside. You'll be fine for a while. For a while. If you don't do this periodically, you'll have seizures like now and your breath will stop. Strictly speaking, this wasn't detoxification. It was the principle of suppressing poison with poison based on the principle of fighting poison with poison. At Mok Jae-eun's words, Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikeseo's expression stiffened. Weren't you going to detoxify me? I never said that. What do you mean? Squeeze. Ugh. Mok Jae-eun grabbed Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ikeseo's cheeks with his hand and smiled, saying, "There's a strict difference between saying I'll save your life and that. This. Did he never intend to detoxify him from the beginning?" Mok Jae-eun whispered in the ear of the bewildered Sang Ikeseo, who realized he had been deceived. Since you've tried controlling someone with poison, being controlled in reverse wouldn't be so bad. At those words, Thousand-Men Commander Ma Are-hyun of the embroidered uniform guard flashed through Sang Ikeseo's mind. Sang Ikeseo had used Ma Are-hyun with the goo poison. But now he was about to be controlled by this person addicted to the poison. This was literally the consequence of one's actions. Mok Jae-eun, who was moving secretly after finishing his business, was lost in thought. Although he had obtained much more information than before, many things were still ambiguous. Especially since many parts he didn't know about his grandfather's death had been revealed, he was becoming more and more curious. What kind of relationship did my grandfather have with them? Why had the organization with the mark targeted his grandfather? And who had really killed his grandfather? The key figure who could solve all these questions was none other than Ghost Blade. Ghost Blade. Coincidentally, everything was leading to him. To contact him, the urgent task was to contact the society leader. Another coincidence here was the Holy Fire Spirit Orb. That was because, like his grandfather, the organization with the mark was targeting this Holy Fire Spirit Orb. No, to be precise, they seemed to want the Holy Fire Spirit Orb's ability. Foresight ability. He still didn't believe it, but if it was possible, it would be a rare ability that everyone would target, not just the organization with the mark. The Holy Fire Spirit Orb who possessed this ability could also be a clue to solving part of the mystery. At least, regardless of the truth of that ability, the person himself would clearly know why the organization with the mark was targeting him. If we find out that reason, it will be useful. The sect leader, the organization with the mark, the Fire Faith Order. All of them were targeting the Holy Fire Spirit Orb. If he secured this person's whereabouts before them, he could use it as leverage to obtain everything he wanted. He would also be able to find out their hidden relationship. Embroidered Uniform Guard 6th Office of Selection. The masked embroidered uniform guard Thousand-Man Commander Ma Arihayan was pacing back and forth in the office with an anxious gaze. What the hell was that Mok Jae-un doing? He had gone saying he would talk, but what he was doing was questionable. Should I have followed him? Things went wrong. It was he who would lose his life due to the goo poison. He didn't know that entrusting his life to someone else would make him so anxious. But if he thought about it, if he had moved with Mok Jae-un and got caught, it might have backfired and he would have been caught instead. Either way, there was nothing he could do. As Ma Arihayan was anxiously circling around the guest table, his eyes with the wall-eye technique trembled. Throb. A sudden intense pain felt in his abdomen. This wasn't just a simple pain. Startled by the intense pain as if something was gnawing at his abdomen, Ma Arihayan clutched his stomach and knelt on one knee. Thud. Ugh. Along with the pain transmitted to his danjian, he even felt his intestines twisting. Ma Arihayan instinctively believed that this was due to the goo poison. Did something go wrong? Otherwise, there was no way he would feel this kind of pain. Had trusting that Mok Jae-un become a mistake? Ma Arihayan gritted his teeth. If that guy had failed and Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo had triggered the goo poison, he was as good as dead. If he was going to die anyway, he had to do everything he could. The pain was so severe that he wanted to curl up and roll around while clutching his stomach. But Ma Arihayan endured it with superhuman patience and sat cross-legged. Let's try to expel the goo poison with true energy. That was the only thing he could do right now. Fortunately, unlike the threat he had heard from Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo, the goo poison was rampaging without touching his danjian, so it seemed he could draw out his true energy. Phew. Ma Arihayan drew out his true energy and sent it to where the goo poison was rampaging. He moved his energy as delicately as possible to control the goo poison, but throb. The moment he sent his energy near it, the goo poison became even more violent and injured his internal organs. It would be painful enough to just be injured, but the goo poison was literally a poison. The moment the goo poison bit, a deadly poison spread to his organs. Uff. Ma Arihayan, who had tried to endure it with superhuman patience, eventually broke his cross-legged position and writhed in pain. He was in no condition to move delicately, let alone use true energy. Clatter. In the midst of that, his mask fell off, but Ma Arihayan was in too much pain to even be aware of it. His eyes with the wall-eye technique rolled back and he convulsed all over his body. Purple blood vessels were rising on his face, and his condition was rapidly deteriorating. Is this how I die? Ma Arihayan, whose consciousness was gradually fading, sensed his own death. As the final moment approached, everything flashed before his eyes like a montage. Your father came from a very far place in the west with a mission. Don't resent him too much. The last words his mother had said about that damned man before her passing also came to mind. Why was this suddenly coming to mind? Thinking that he would die without having accomplished anything, everything felt futile. The only consolation was that he hadn't caused trouble for his mentor Soyeon, the Thousand-Man Commander. With the evidence like this, she, being clever, would be able to catch Associate Military Commissioner Sang Ik-seo. Ugh. His consciousness was gradually fading away. It was at that moment. Schwip. Someone placed their hands on Ma Reihan's abdomen and the Baihui acupoint on the top of his head. Then something surged into his body. Ma Reihan's eyes, which had been closing, opened wide. Ma Reihan's eyes trembled. The energy surging into his body was different from the internal energy that exhibited the usual nourishing energy. This wasn't the true energy he knew. It was like an endless darkness entering, reminiscent of an abyss. And within that darkness, whoosh, there was something brutal to the point of despair. What the hell is this? Ma Reihan was gripped by a strange feeling at this unknown brutal energy he had never experienced before. He should have rejected this dangerous energy, but instead he gradually became accustomed to it along with the thrill. No, it was more accurate to say that he was being rapidly eroded. Sizzle. At some point, black haze began to flow out from Ma Reihan's entire body. It was none other than demonic energy.